Hi there, this is Mike from the Excel Trainer, and in this video I'm going to explain and demonstrate the Lambda function in Excel. Lambda was introduced into Excel in late 2020. It was initially made available to Microsoft 365 users on the Insider Beta channel. Eventually Microsoft planned to make it available to all Microsoft 365 subscribers, although there's no timeline for that to happen. But what exactly is Lambda? Well, Lambda allows you to create your own worksheet functions. Excel already has about 400 built-in functions, things like sum and count and if and VLOOKUP and so on. So why would you need to build your own functions? In short, creating a custom function provides an alternative to having to work out the logic and then type in a complex formula. So, for example, instead of using a long-winded formula to calculate which quarter of a year a particular date is in, you could create a function, call it quarter, and use it like any of the built-in functions. Building custom functions in Excel isn't new. You've always been able to do it using VBA. However, for non-programmers, VBA can have a steep learning curve. Also, some people see VBA as a security threat, and the fact that VBA isn't supported on iPads or the web version of Excel is also a concern for some people. So, how does Lambda work? Let me show you with a couple of examples. Here we have 3 lists, and each list contains sales transactions for the 3 products that our fictitious company sells. Each transaction displays the revenue generated and the cost of manufacturing the items. The formula in column D calculates the profit. Would I build a Lambda-based function to replace this formula? Probably not. It's a simple subtraction. There's no real time saving to be had. Where I would create a Lambda-based function is where the alternative is creating a long-winded complex formula or a series of nested or combined functions. So, for example, I've been asked to include a column that displays the quarter that a transaction occurred in, and this is the formula that I came up with. But by creating a custom function that encapsulates the calculation, rather than typing in that complex formula, I could type in, for example, equals quarter, open brackets, A5. Although in the real world, I wouldn't create a custom function to calculate the profit. This isn't the real world. It's a demo aimed at helping you to understand Lambda. I want to keep it as simple as possible, so I'm going to use the profit as an example. Let's look at how to use Lambda to create the function. Step 1 is to test it out. First of all, I'll delete all of these formulas that calculate the profit. Then I'll go back to D5. You start by typing into the cell equals lambda, open brackets. Like Excel's built-in functions, a custom function requires parameters. And parameters can be cell references, numbers, dates, or text entries. A function created with Lambda can have up to 253 parameters. My profit function requires 2 parameters, one to represent the revenue and one to represent the cost. When creating the function, each parameter requires a name. And the name can be anything, but I like to be logical with my names. And as the parameters will represent the revenue and the cost, it makes sense to call them revenue and cost. So I'll type in the name of the first parameter, which I'm calling revenue. Then I'll add a comma, and then I'll type the name of the second parameter, which is cost. Then I'll type another comma. If you have more parameters, you just keep typing their names. But at some point you'll have finished typing the parameters, and the last thing you need to do is to create the calculation. This is the actual calculation that the function will use. So in this case, it's revenue minus cost. Now that's not to do with the column headings revenue and cost, it just happens to be coincidence that I've named my parameters the same as the column headings. So it's the parameters revenue and cost. So I type revenue, I don't actually need to type the whole name. As I start typing, it appears in the autocomplete list. The X next to it means that it's a parameter. So I can just double click on it to save me typing it all. Then a minus sign and then cost. And then close the bracket and press enter. At this point, you can see the actual formula in the formula bar and the result is in D5. But the result is hash calc, and that's because we haven't supplied any values to the function's parameters. It doesn't understand what revenue and cost are. So I click up in the formula bar to the right of the formula. I type an open bracket and then I either type B5 or click on B5, and I'm using B5 because that's the cell that contains the value for the first parameter. Then I put a comma and I do the same for C5. Close the brackets and enter. Now that's only step one. It might look a bit strange at this point, but that's how you test out the Lambda. You don't actually have to do that step if you're convinced that the Lambda will work, but it's advisable to do that step. Step 2 is to assign a name to the function. And part of the naming process actually involves entering in the calculation. So rather than having to retype it into the name manager, I'm going to copy the formula, but not the whole formula, just the bit before I specify the parameter values. So it's that bit there. Select that and copy. Then open up Excel's Name Manager by clicking on Formulas, Name Manager, and click New. I can call the function anything I like, but to me it should be logical, and because it's going to calculate the profit, I'm going to call the function profit. Now it's actually put profit in there, but only because it's looked at the cell directly above where my cursor is, and in D4 it's got the word profit. That's not always going to be the case, so you may have to type into the name box whatever you want to use as the name. I'll leave it as profit. In the refers to box, delete out what's in there and paste in what we just previously copied. Once you've done that, click on OK and close. So now that we've named the function, how do we actually use it? Well, I need to delete the function that I put into D5 because that was just for testing. And then to use the function, I would go to the cell where I want to put the function in, which in this case is D5, and type equals profit. You can see that profit does appear in the autocomplete list with a different symbol next to it that indicates it's a custom function. Double click on it. Now, there are a few differences to the behavior that you would expect in Excel. It doesn't put in the open bracket when you double click, so you have to put that in yourself. The other thing it doesn't do is it doesn't give you the tooltips or prompts. Unlike regular functions in Excel, Lambda defined functions don't have tooltips, so you'll need to know which parameter is which. Something for Microsoft to add to the future improvements list, I think. So in this case, it will be B5, C5. Close the brackets and enter. And as you would expect with any function or formula, you see the result in the cell and you see the formula in the formula bar. Copy the formula down and then copy from column D to column J and to column P. So that's the first demo complete. In the second demo, I'm going to create a Lambda function to calculate the quarter. So let's start by deleting these formulas from column E and column K and column Q. Let's go back to E5. In E5, I'll put equals Lambda. Now I only need one parameter for this function. It's just going to be the cell that contains the date that I want to extract the quarter from. So I'll call the parameter date, then comma, And then the calculation. Well, I want it to say QTR1, QTR2 and so on. I don't just want a number 1, 2, 3 or 4. So I'll start by typing QTR space in quotes, then join that to round up month, then date divided by 3, 0, and 2 closing brackets. Now I'm not going to go into the details of what that's doing, but it's basically calculating which quarter the date is in and adding QTR to the beginning. It gives me calc as the result, as you'd expect. So if I go up to the formula bar and then in brackets type A5, gives me QTR1. Now I've tested that out and I know it works, I'm going to copy the syntax of the function and go to the name manager and create a new name, which I'm going to call quarter, and then in the refers to I'll paste in the syntax of the function. Click OK. So let's test it out to see if it works. Go to E5 and put equals quarter, open brackets, A5. Copy that down and then try it in column K, equals quarter, and select G5. Copy that down and go to column Q and put equals quarter. I could of course have just copied these across, but I'm just showing you that it works in separate columns. Select M5 and copy that down. So there's an example of a Lambda function that just takes one parameter. Now the last demo in this video is to show you how to amend a function. Column C and column G contain a custom function called payment due, which is used to calculate the date when the customer must pay. And this is 30 days from the transaction date. The function payment due takes a single parameter. It's the cell containing the transaction date. If I go to the name manager, formulas name manager, and select payment due, we can see that the formula is a Lambda function and it's adding 30 onto the parameter transaction date. Our payment terms have now changed and we require payment within 14 days. So I simply go and change that 30 to a 14, click on the tick, close the name manager, and all of those dates in column C and column G update. So that's an introduction to Lambda in Excel. Being new, Lambda does have a couple of limitations. One I mentioned earlier, no tooltips, but a bigger limitation is that currently you can't define a function in one workbook and use it in another. So is it worth it? As you've seen, when creating a function, you still need to know and type in the underlying mathematical formula. But if you've got a long-winded calculation that needs to be reused multiple times within the same file, or you're building a spreadsheet for someone else to use who isn't as savvy with formulas and functions as you are, then it's definitely worth creating it as a Lambda function.